Thank you very much for the intro, and I want to thank you all guys for being here today. I will try to make the session interactive and informative so that you can leave it actually gaining some new knowledge about creativity and how to apply it to your daily work. A few words about me. I'm an ex-Trivago creative lead. I was working just across the road for almost 4 years. And after that, I founded an animation studio, which I'm running currently from Berlin. And I'm a newly appointed head of video production at HelloFresh. So today, I'm going to give you some insights about how I work and how people in the industry work, who I respect for their creative efforts. So let's start. So growing up, we all heard a theory that there is left-brained people who are more logical and analytical, and there is right-brained people who are more creative and innovative. This is a complete myth. It was an easy-to-understand concept, and there is an entire generation of people who grew up thinking that they had to fall into one camp or another. So logic and science, or creativity and arts. And for some reason, we could not be both. Those who did assign themselves into the creative camp, they faced another myth, that creativity is somehow connected to artistry. We would say, I can draw or I can paint, and this would mean that I'm creative. In reality, creativity can be connected to artistry, but it can also be seen in completely different areas, like engineering, geology, or business. There is a few other myths that come together with creativity. That you have to be a little bit out of this world to be creative, that you are born with it, and that inspiration hits you like a strike of lightning. So, as I started investigating and asking different people in the industry and trying to find a definition for myself that I believed in, what is creativity, I came across a few of really interesting things. The definition that I like the most comes from Stefan Mumau, who said that creativity is solving problems with relevance and novelty. Let's break this down into two parts. Relevancy. Relevancy means actually solving the problem, as if there was a problem and your solution was there at hand. Your solution should have value to someone. It could be either a monetary value in the form of a business idea. It could be a social value in the form of a movement, or it could be a creative value, and therefore emotions that you're causing in your audience. Novelty is a bit harder to judge, but novelty is when you're solving problems originally. Like nobody expected you to come up with a solution, or it has never been done before. So putting it together, creativity is really just solving problems in original ways. Like for many of you here today, creativity for me is not just a random task that I use on the weekends. It is something that is required from me on a daily basis. And I found this definition by Todd Henry regarding what creative work is. You go to work each day tasked with inventing brilliant solutions that meet specific objectives by defined deadlines. If you do this successfully, you get to keep a job. If you don't, you get to work on your resume. The moment you exchange your creative efforts for money, you enter the world where you will have to be brilliant at a moment's notice. No pressure, right? It's kind of the same whether you're a creative lead like me, a CEO, a project manager, or a designer. Coming up with original solutions is part of your daily job. And since coming up with solutions looks like a free and a renewable source, we think that we can do it endlessly without feeling any side effects. It turns out that it's not like that. If you run without renewing your creative resources, eventually you will fail. My personal story of discovering creativity, yeah, that's me, discovering the world. So my personal story of discovering creativity lies around the fact that my life has always been naturally full of elements that would keep me creative. For the last 5 years, I have been leading creative projects all around the world, from South Africa to Iceland, working with international teams, and I studied to be a designer and in TV journalism. I lived in 5 countries. So somehow there was always this inspirational vibe around me, and I never really thought about how am I doing that. Until one day I faced a creative burnout, It was very hard for me to come up with ideas. I stopped being original. I felt like I had no energy, and this loop was going even further. So I was not producing outstanding work anymore, so I was not getting motivation from it. So I decided to stop for a second, take a sabbatical, and think of how can I improve this situation. I discussed this topic with many people in the industry who I personally find incredibly creative, and I asked them, what is the key to creativity? And they all gave me the same answer. No matter what was their cultural or professional background, they told me that creativity is something that you need to practice, just like sports. You cannot run endlessly on your natural resources, and there is no one formula that will make you creative overnight, but rather practices that will increase the likelihood of having great ideas. So key to creativity, both short-term and long-term, are structures and practices. So let's make a few steps back from our everyday understanding of creativity and look into neuroscience of things. The brain is, of course, much more complicated than a simple left-right binary. So over the past couple of decades, improvements in the functional MRI allowed scientists a remarkable insight into our brain activity. Studies have been made on creative tasks performed by poets, designers, and even rap singers. Neuroscience have not revealed one single creative part of the brain, but understood that creativity is a broad and unique configuration of different brain regions that typically don't work together. For creativity, science hypothesized that the big three operates as a team. The default mode network generates ideas, the executive control network evaluates them, and the salience network helps to identify which ideas get passed along to the executive control network. So it looks like it's a synchrony between these different systems that define creativity. There is this big debate about nature versus nurture. Is there a genetic basis that some people are just naturally more creative and come up with ideas easier than others? Nick Silicorn, an innovation coach, in his lectures mentioned that it turns out that only 30% of your creative abilities is based on the genetics. It means that 70% of people's creativity was actually based on the aspects built by their behavior. There was another study that was done, asking school children whether they consider themselves creative or not. In the second grade, the number of kids that answered, yes, I am creative, was 90%. By the time these kids reached high school, this number dropped to 5. So there is something that is happening in the school years that is essentially drilling out creativity from people. There is many theories on what's going on, but one of the common theories is that in schools we're being taught how to give the right answer. We're taught how to memorize A or B in order to pass the test. Because the test is the most important thing in school, because that's what defines which high school you're going to go to. And in high school it defines which university you're going to go to. And this pretty much defines a big part of your life. So rather than innovating and creating, we're learning how to memorize the right answers. So how can we change our way of thinking? Now we're getting into a very interesting topic, neuroscience of things, and I will recap an explanation of an expert in neuroscience of creativity. His name is Morten Fries Olivares. So according to what scientists say, the best way to help people increase their creative abilities is by explaining them how the brain functions. University of Oslo did a study with 200 students explaining them how their memory system works, how they retrieve information, how they filter information, and how the memory works in terms of creativity in general. What they saw is that within 6 weeks, the creative ability of students rose up to 30%. So it seems that once you understand how your brain functions, you are actually able to use it to your advantage. Very similar studies have been done in professional environments where people have been working in the same areas for perhaps a decade, solving very similar problems every single day. It turns out that once they understood how brains sometimes can work against them, the creative abilities rose up to 70%. But we have to realize that the brain is not capable of producing new information from scratch. What we can do is only take the information that we already have in our memory and then combine that in different ways. It is important to understand that ideas don't just spontaneously rise. They are just new combinations of things that we already know. According to Morton, you can think about your memory system as a bag of Lego bricks. You can take these Lego bricks and you can combine them in the infinite number of structures. But if all the Lego bricks you have are red, the only structures that you will be able to build are going to be red. So that means that our creativity is highly dependent on the type of information that we have in our memory system. So how can we apply this knowledge? This brings us to an important practice called trash in, trash out. Those who are doing machine learning probably know this. Our generation, we are visual learners. Every day we scroll through 300 feet of content on our phones. This is the size of a football pitch. So what we could do is really go through the selection of the social media, of reads, and of TV shows that we are watching. We can try to keep it as diverse as possible and as useful as possible for the future. Coming back to our Lego bricks, that's actually not the only key to creativity, because it doesn't matter if you have the coolest Lego bricks in your bag if your memory is not making them available to you. We all know the situations when someone comes up with a really great idea and we think, wow, I had all the same knowledge, I could have come up with it as well. But you didn't, because your brain does not make it available to you. Because brain is actually one of the laziest organs that we're going to meet. It has learned to be so advanced that it knows how to take shortcuts. Nick Silicorn explains that if you set a creativity challenge to someone, most people's brain will follow exactly the same sequence. The first ideas that people will come up with, they're actually just memories. Because the brain has given us this information last time, and it thinks that you want to solve this solution in exactly the same way. And this is very clever from the evolutionary point of view, because this saves energy. So eventually, the first round of your brainstorming session is going to be just memories. If you then push people further and say, hey, yeah, we know it worked last time, but how about something more original? People are going to come up with ordinary ideas. And ordinary ideas are very, very similar to memories. They are just memories with a twist. Say exactly the same idea, but in a different color, or in a different shape, or exactly the same idea, but placed in a new location. Because the brain knows that this is very, very close to something that has worked in the past, so it's safe to suggest that. If you then push people further and say, yeah, like we know it worked, but let's think out of the box. Let's come up with something completely new in here, because the thing that we're trying to do is very, very different. This is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, because once you push people past that first initial ideas, the brain thinks, well, I have actually accomplished my task. I've done what you asked me to. I've generated an idea, so now I'm going to shut down again. So only if you push them further, this is where the ideas and the memories start to make new connections that didn't exist before. This is where the actual value in ideas come. These are the ideas that are unique and that are going to be useful for whatever case you're doing it. This brings us to a very important point, that creativity takes time. We need to allow ourselves to digest information to produce something valuable. As we have learned, our brain loves to give us easy solutions, solutions that are on the surface. And there is another very common trap that we can get into, and it's called rituals. We all know the situation when sometimes you go to a new coffee shop and you're really productive and innovative in there. So this might hit you as a ritual that you need to be following. So you keep coming to this cafe every day, but a few days after, your creativity starts to drop again. This happens because it's not the place that was the source of your creativity. It was the fact that you changed something into your routine and you did something new, what boosted the creativity for a while. So the rule here is to constantly change. It's not about finding your comfort zone. It's about constantly getting out of your comfort zone in order to produce something innovative and creative. There is another important step in generating ideas, and many of us miss the step because of time pressures or other external pressures. And this step is called incubation. The best case scenario to come up with a great idea is to fill your brain with all the relevant information and inspiration that you can find, then step back and let it process. Let it come up with these new connections of neurons that are going to generate new ideas. Because 99% of our brain activity is actually something that's happening when we're not aware of it. Something that happens when we let it process, when we just step back and let it do its job. That's why sometimes your mind is wandering around. So even if you're sitting here in the room, you can find that you're daydreaming, your thoughts are somewhere else. This is because your brain is processing information from the day and it's making these new connections that will potentially generate ideas. So daydreaming is actually very helpful, but just for a while. So you also need to know how to bring your awareness back to you. So we know the stories of artists who cannot explain where the great idea come from. They just say that it was a moment of eureka. But in reality, it wasn't. It was a very well-planned role of the brain who took all the information on board, then stepped back, and then in a very unexpected moment came up with a great idea. Before we move into a practical block, I want to show you something really cool that I found during a research. So 5 years ago, when you would be Googling top creative tips or tips for creatives or things like that, you would only find some articles and maybe some exercises. But what I found this year completely blown my mind. So it's an actual device that you put on your head when you want to stimulate your creativity. So it's kind of like biohacking. So for me, it is still more science fiction rather than science. It's something that Bradbury would be writing in his books about. But it is reality, and it is happening, and you can even become, I think, a participant in this challenge. So let's have a look.
What is the essence of creativity? What makes some people more creative than others? Is it upbringing? Is it the genes? Is it the training? How's the combination of all those factors? So me and a colleague of mine, Morten, we have been working for, almost 8 years on cognitive training for creativity. So we have tried to build training programs that can make people more creative. And what we saw was behavioral change is super complex. So one thing is to make a successful training program, but the problem is to actually make sure people maintain whatever habit you teach them. Normal people, when they concentrate on a task, they get a lot of activity in the front, but they decrease the activity in the back, because the back produces sort of random stuff. Super creative people, they do the opposite. So when they activate in the front, they actually have more activation in the back, which means that even though they are concentrating on the task, their brain is still firing information you haven't asked for, you haven't consciously requested it. So we've been looking into different biohacking methods we could use to support the training programs. And then we've been following this technology that we use, TDCS. The only thing you need to do is get it right. So I have a big head, so I need it on full size. And then it has 3 electrodes. It has 2 in the front, 1 in the back. So I'll just put it on now just for the viewer. This is just to ensure that it's correctly placed. And then I use my phone to activate it. And then I can direct the current from the headset to go in and out of these 3 electrodes. And what happens, if you think about sort of my brain, is where the current goes into the brain, that area has better circumstances for working. So I can dictate more potential here, less potential there, more here, and I can move that around. So that's the basic idea, that I can actually play a program for my phone that activates the headset to send currents in certain patterns that supports my brain in doing certain operations. And so while we are doing lab studies, and we have to do lab studies of course, we're also trying to move the technology out to the users. And we do something we call crowd science, and we can also do reporting. So if you use this at home, then every session you do, we ask you to feedback. What did you do? Did it help? Did it not help? What did it help with? And that's what I'm interested in, is seeing how it works in the real world. There are a lot of jobs computer can do better. So we have to focus on the things that we can do better, and so far that's creativity. Prosper or prosperity has a lot to do with being truthful. It's about actually pursuing something, and the having the outlook and actually living towards something more than the goal of something in itself. So it's this, all the cliches about doing what you do now in a good way because you have an idea about where you're ending up. I think to me would be the philosophical part.
So who would use this device on a voluntary basis? 2, 3, 4? All right, not so many people. That's good. So then my traditional exercises will work now. So it turns out that we can measure creativity in a standard way without using additional devices. This is a test which was found by Nick Skillicorn. It is broadly used in psychology and in neuroscience to judge creativity rates of someone. And it's very associative task, so you need to come up with random ideas based on the object that I will give you. And this task looks very simple and even childish, but the truth is that most of creative tasks are very obvious. So it's just about the fact that you practice them every day. This is going to increase your chances of having better ideas. So you would need a phone or a notebook to make some notes. So get your phones because it's going to be interesting. So after this test, we're going to have 7 learnings and they're all going to be based on it. So try to make some notes, right? So we're going to do a 30-second version of the test. And first, I'm going to give you an example. So here we see a standard normal shoelace. And the task is to generate as many new uses of this object as you can think of. How else, rather than using it in a standard way, you can use it? First, let me give you an example. So with a shoelace, I could make a knot to tie a boat. I could make a necklace, or I could make a toy for a dog or your cat. So the ideas can be random, they can be absurd, it doesn't matter. What matters is that they're unique and individual ideas. So now I'm going to give you your object, and I'm going to time 30 seconds and try to write down as many things as come to your mind. Ready? Go. Toothbrush. Please generate as many new uses of this object as you can think of. How else, rather than brushing teeth, could you use a toothbrush? 30 seconds. 25. And the time is out. So, how many ideas do you guys have? Anyone? 1 idea? 1 idea? 2 ideas? 2? 4? Okay. 3? Anyone? Majority of the room. That's actually really cool, because if you give 3 ideas in 30 seconds, that's the world's average. So scientists are still working on the precise number, but so far it has been 6 individual ideas in a minute. So in our case, 3 in 30 seconds. So if you have done it, very well. If you have not done 3 individual ideas, that is totally fine. It means that you have not been practicing it before. So if you practice to do something like this every evening before going to sleep, I can assure you that in 1 month, you're going to be just firing with ideas here. You're going to have 20 in 30 seconds. So yeah, one way to calculate your result is the actual number of individual ideas that you're given. And the second type is to actually look at the uniqueness of each idea. So if you gave 10 ideas, but they're kind of the same, just of a different color, that would be just 1 idea, right? So they need to be really individual. And another way to calculate your creativity rate is based on the crowd. So we take all individual idea here in the room, and then we see how many of them are original, and then we can give you your personalized creativity rate. This is a very short exercise, but it is actually a base to all the other creative exercises out there. You can make it more complex, you can come up with words or a combination of words rather than a single object, and you can just play around and train yourself, train your team, and just use it randomly when you're driving a car. This will be really useful in the long term. You can do another great exercise. It is called Creativity with Everyday Objects. So you take a random object and you try to visualize it in a context. So you try to implement it in a new environment. So if you can draw, you draw it. If you cannot, then you just write it in the form of words. It's just important that you externalize it. And here are a few examples from one of my favorite illustrators, Christoph Niemann. And you can see what cool things he did here. So it's a bread, which is actually a beard of someone, and a book, which are the mustache of a kitten. And very easy things, but incredibly creative. So this task has endless opportunities. So you can practice it, and I'm highly recommending it. This exercise is actually also done in all design schools, whether you're drawing or using computer. Very popular. It's actually also interesting to mention that the longer you work on the same topic, the more chances you have of generating a genius idea. So like our favorite movie directors or singers, sometimes they do really cool stuff and we think that it cannot get any better. And then boom, and they come up with a new hit. That's because they have trained their brain to work on the same topic over and over again. So the deeper they look into the topic, the more interesting the connections in their brain formulates and the better the ideas they generate. So, coming back to our short but very useful exercise, let's have a look at what we can learn from there. Learning number 1, you can schedule your creative peaks. This is a learning I got from Stefan Mumau, and it will help us schedule creativity. So, this shape right here is a shape of ideation. So, every brainstorming session that you will ever enter, whether it's alone or with a team, you will always have time. In our particular instance, it was 30 seconds. And you will always have a quality or a quantity of ideas that you have to generate. So sometimes the task would be to generate as many ideas as possible, and sometimes to generate one, but a very good quality. So here you choose for yourself. And this is a shape. So what we see here is that in the beginning, we fire up ideas. So as we learned, it's mostly memories or something that we have seen in the past. So we give 1, 2, 3, 4 ideas, and then we drop. Because every creative goes into the state that, like, I'm never going to finish it, it's impossible, I need to quit now, and it's never going to work. And then something happens right there in that yellow spot. And this is actually when someone offered something really stupid or absurd. An idea that doesn't make sense, an idea that will never be used, an idea that is completely out of the brief. But what it did is it generated a whole bunch of new quality ideas. And that wave over there, this is what we want. This is where quality is. So if this ideation shape works out every single time the same way, then we can plan for it. We can schedule it. So we can be willing to be the guy in the room to say something really absurd or to offer an idea that doesn't make sense. And we're not going to be afraid to do that because we know that it's going to spark a whole bunch of new and quality ideas after that. Or we could be willing to encourage the team to do that. I think that this is a very interesting learning, and for me as a creative, also working with a team, sometimes it's hard to boost the team and to make them think out of the box, and it's also very scary to offer something stupid in the room. But if we all know that it works that way, then it's less scary and more powerful. Learning number 2. Creativity takes uninterrupted stretches of time. This line, this is the uninterrupted stretch of time. It's not blocked with emails in between or with little calls. It all takes this long stretch. So we know that our brain works, that it's giving us first answers that are on the surface. So if we're coming back to our exercise, most likely the first 1 or 2 answers here in the room, they're all going to be the same. Because the brain just gave us something that was obvious and on the surface. It's only when we push it further down the line, when we force the brain to look deeper and to think further, this is where our ideas become interesting and valuable and unique. Because creativity takes time. We can take it as a rule for our brainstorming sessions and for deadlines for our creative concepts. Because best idea will probably be idea number 100. And it will incorporate all the wonderful things from the first 99 ideas. So the best thing to do is to start generating those bad ideas and try to externalize them. In the form of a demo, of a sketch, of an illustration, in words, however you can. But it's just important to get it out there and to share it with the world, because then it will be easier for you to see the flows and to move on to a next and better version of it. In my industry, in advertising and in media, what we do when we have a brief, we get into the room and we try to solve it as fast as possible. And technically, the first two ideas that we come up with, they solve the brief. So we think, why go any further? Why pushing it even more if our idea kind of answers the brief? So we go and we execute this idea, and then we look at what our competitors do, and they've done exactly the same thing. Because they followed the same sequence. They got into the room, they tried to save some time, they spent only 1 hour on it, and they generated pretty much something very, very similar. So it's kind of the relevancy scale. Adults are very good at solving problems relevantly, but novelty is something that we really struggle with. Learning number 3. Creative restrictions are good. So, in order for us to be creative, most of the times we say, I need less restrictions. I need more money, I need more time, I need bigger team, I need more assets. That's how I can be creative. But in reality, restrictions is what making you creative. The more restrictive the environment, the more creative the opportunity. How many obstacles did we have to overcome in this exercise today? So we had a limited amount of time, we had a specific object, we had to do it in a crowd, and we had to think out of the box. So we had 4. And we overcame the problem because we had the problem. So restrictions is something that helped us think out of the box. Nike recently did a very interesting brief around risks and restrictions, and it's a super cool project. Basically what they did is they took the streets of São Paulo and they decided to make graffiti characters with the shape of their new Air Max shoes on top of each character. It was a very risky project because the governor hates graffiti, and previously he erased hundreds of works, and he forced creatives to simply update the old works. So Nike took the opportunity and they updated the old characters on the streets of São Paulo and drawn the shoes on top of their feet. And this campaign was an incredible success. It won a lot of Cannes Lions this year, so I would like you to invite to watch it.
Nike Air Max is a pivotal part of the street culture. So to launch the new models in Brazil, we put them on the feet of those who most represent the streets. The graffiti characters of Sao Paulo.
I wouldn't do that.
What?
The governor hates graffiti. He erased hundreds of them.
I know, bro. That's why we hacked the ones that survived. This is the Air Max Graffiti Store. In partnership with Instagraffiti, Brazil's biggest street art collective, we invited artists to update their own existing characters with the new Air Max models. Every week, a new drop in different regions of the city. The only way to get the sneakers on a limited pre-sale was to visit the walls, access Nike.com, and unlock the purchase through geolocation. Everything in seconds with no lines.
That's sick.
Yeah, and to spread the word about the project, we gave life to our most iconic character, showing off his new Air Max around town. Graffiti fans loved it, but sneakerheads, they went crazy.
Ó, Air Max 720.
Você tem que vir aqui e desbloquear por geolocalização.
Que isso, moleque? Desbloqueado. Finalizar a compra.
We were planning the next drops, and then this happened.
Wait, the governor got convicted?
Yeah, so backed by the court decision, we brought back 6 iconic characters erased by him, wearing 6 new Air Max models. Sneakers were sold out in minutes, but the mural will live on as cultural heritage to the city. With 10 drops and counting, the project became a profitable platform for new releases. The Air Max graffiti stores transformed city walls into Nike stores, turning the brand's e-commerce into a cultural experience.
Yeah, so for my personal taste, it's a great example of creativity and of coming up with solutions even out of restrictions. Another example from this year, also from them, was also super cool. So in Chicago, apparently there was a wave of gun violence on the street, so kids could not play basketball on the streets. So what Nike did is they took an old church and they turned it into a center for culture and sports for kids so that they could safely play basketball off the streets. I mean, a bit contradictory with a religious topic, but I think the whole problem solving is very clear here. Learning number 4, still coming back to our exercise. Single focus. Jumping from one task to another is something that our everyday schedule looks like. Imagine if during this exercise you would be interrupted. So you would get distracted, you would lose focus, and eventually you would lose time. And this is what's happening with our everyday work, but on a larger scale. Because the way we think is that it's only going to be this 20 seconds that I'm going to answer the email. But in reality, it's not those 20 seconds. It's the time that you need to go back into the state of mind and thoughts that you were before. Switching attention does not allow us to look deeper into the topic and to come up with original solutions. You can try to make clustering of tasks that require the same way of thinking and acting. For example, having a day, a week, without answering emails or messages, and setting this time only to strategic thinking and to original problem solving. This is something that I incorporated in my team, and it works really well. And everybody can survive without your email being answered for one day. That's for sure. Learning number 5. Yes, and. So this rule was created by a man called Alex Osborne. Back in 1941, he was the guy who invented brainstorming. And he was one of the founders of BBDO, one of the creative agencies. He invented brainstorming because he found that conventional business meetings were not helping the ideation process. So he was looking for some techniques that would help the team loosen up and be more creative. The original term that he used to describe the process was to think up. The principle of yes and has 2 parts in it. So it's based on the acceptance and building. So yes means that I'm going to accept what you're offering to me. No matter how dumb or stupid this idea sounds to you, you don't get to say like, wow, that doesn't make sense, let's move on. You have to accept it. And means that you're going to offer something of value on top of that. So you're going to build on top. So if we're going to use the yes and principle in our brainstorming sessions, then we're going to be completely free of judgment. And this is the state of mind that we need. But what we are currently doing is completely the opposite. We're constantly judging our own ideas or ideas of others. There's no creative value in being cynical. There's no point of looking for the reasons why something will not work. It's far more productive to look for the reasons why something will work. And this is what we could use in our brainstorming sessions. Learning number 6, defying the task. This one goes to all the leads out there. Very often when creative teams get a task, it sounds something like, create a new campaign. And this is very broad, like this will leave your creative team solving not the actual content problem, but figuring out what are the KPIs of your company, what is the target goal of this campaign, what is the key audience, and all of this. So it's very unproductive, and this will lose time and energy from the team. It's better to state the task very, very clear. And another thing that I came across, especially in consultancy, is a tendency to complicate things by using unclear abbreviations and complex language. And first of all, it's very intimidating when you don't understand it. And second of all, it will take the focus away from solving the actual problem. So it's far more productive to state the task easy and clear. The better results you're going to get from that. Being a creative sounds very romantic to strangers. When I started my first creative job at the age of 17 on a local TV station, I thought that I will be sitting in Starbucks and blending with the city and coming up with some creative solutions. But in the reality, it's a lot of solo and silent work. So you come in the morning to your desk, you sit down, and you work until something comes out of your head. So you kind of allow creativity to happen by working hard. And if you really love what you do, this will boost the unconditional creativity, which will make it easier and more fun for you to create. I would like to finish this talk by showing another piece that I found incredibly creative. It was developed by a team in the US, and I think it's a good statement to understand how complex the task can be, but still be solved in a creative and pleasant to look way.
Greetings. I am Salvador Felipe Jacinto Dalí y Domenech, and I am back.
Even though Dali's been gone for 30 years, we're using artificial intelligence to bring him back today. In order to actually train this AI to reproduce Dali's likeness, we've started with finding the right footage of Dali, and then we split that up into frames where he's looking the right way, and we pick the best frames to use for training from that. Our system learns exactly what he looks like and how his mouth moves and how his eyes move and his eyebrows and every little detail about what makes Dali Dali.
This is actually a recreated version of Dali. It's not a person playing Dali with makeup. It is actually Dali. We're very careful to use his words so that you learn a lot about what he thought and the way he thought.
People want access to art. They want a way in. It can be through technology, through learning about the artist.
Greetings. Welcome.
This technology allows people to imagine for a moment that there is such a thing as immortality, to see Dali alive again.
The whole future of Dali is explained in the brother painting.
I saw Dali, but like his actual form, full figure, speaking personally to me.
He was welcome into the museum to see his art, and like I still have goosebumps.
It is good to be back.
He talked about the museum and his paintings.
There comes a moment in every big person's life when they realize they adore Dali. In your life, this moment will also be known as Wednesday. Go tell it to your friends.
Mr. Dali, very live.
Before you leave, you will take a picture with me?
Sure. Yeah.
Alors. 1, 2, 3. Ooh la la! Would you like me to send you this dream photograph? Follow the instructions.
What that adds is a sense of emotion. If they can empathize with this man as a human being, then they can relate to the work much more directly, much more passionately.
To understand the art, you need to understand the artists behind the art. And this technique allows visitors of the Dali Museum to do just that.
I do not believe in my death. Do you?
That's all from my side. Thank you very much for being here and for listening. And I'm gonna forward the floor now.
Thank you very, very much for this very creative and inspiring talk. I would like to open the questions and answers for now. So anyone who has some questions noted. We will throw that red ball at you. So don't be afraid.
Ole.
That's fine. It's robust. It's no problem.
Sorry.
We lost the... Yeah, it's broken now.
Well, yeah.
Okay, it still works.
Yeah.
So one of the first slides you showed about the incubation time or about taking a step back. So you mainly talked about daydreaming to let the idea process and to give you time. So, I mean, I do a lot of daydreaming, but I don't feel very productive or creative. So what else do you recommend to take this step back?
Mm-hmm. So your question is how to implement it into your workday or just in general? In general. So I think it's important that this process is very acknowledged. So it's not something that you're drifting away with your thoughts and never coming back. It's something that you're doing because you know that you have a specific task. It's something when you first brief yourself with something and then you let yourself go wind away. And then you pick those ideas which you think are useful. So here a few very banal but very useful things is to always have something to write with you. And then there is another study that was done that shows that once we're in a specific time of our sleep, this is where we actually kind of daydreaming, but night dreaming. And this is where very great ideas can come from. So what some creatives do, they sleep in 1.5 hour sequences. So let's say 6 hours or 7.5 hours, and then they wake up every time on that time frame. And apparently they always have great ideas because this is the rapid phase of your dream. And this could also help you come up with something new. So always have a notebook with you, try to sleep in sequences, because actually it's also healthy to sleep in this 1.5 hour sequences. So make conscious daydreaming and see how this works for you. And if this kind of generates you some stuff, then you can move to like a next level. If this doesn't help you, then give me a call. We fix it.
Thank you. Can you just pass it?
Yeah. Okay. I have a question about if there's like a rule or a tip about when do you push harder and when you just go away and do something else instead of trying more, I guess.
Yeah, so switching attention is very useful, right? So that's why since childhood we always thought like take a break, go for a walk, chill. Yeah, so take a chill pill. So that is important, right? So we have to do this, but I think it also comes from your goal. So in my personal case, I always push harder. So I never stop until I'm satisfied with the idea that I have or with the concept that I have. But I know that many of the directors, for example, the creative directors who I work with, they go on holidays during the project. So before signing the brief, they say, yeah, like we have this quarter to work on and I'm going to be away for like 2 months out of 3. And you're like, how is that going to help us? And this is the way that they work. So they need to switch attention and to switch environments in order to generate something cool. So I think there is no general rule. It's about how it works for you. But I think what is important here is to try different things before you decide that what works for you.
Okay, because I was always like the person who change things up because I feel like stuck and don't want to push harder. So I just was asking if it's okay to do so, I guess.
Yeah, it's good to do so if that helps you. If you see that after switching 2 or 3 times during the day, it worked for you. So sometimes if I work, I don't know, like on the weekends, if I'm home and I need to do something, I change the rooms every hour because I get stuck like in one place. So it's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I have also one question. For technical products, I noticed that during the ideation process, when the people find some ideas, people jump directly to the technical feasibility of the product. And then we are evaluating this, whether it is possible to produce this. And if it is not, and then we are dismissing the ideas. But in technical things, if something today is not possible, in 5 years, maybe it is possible. I mean, not imaginable things. And this is, of course, a problematic problem for finding creative ideas. And my question is how to avoid directly jumping technical feasibility of implementation of anything, how to avoid these things in technical context. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Actually, there is also a very interesting topic that you mentioned in your question, which I'm going to touch first. So you mentioned that some ideas that you come up with now, they might be relevant in 5 years, but today they're not feasible. And for this, I highly recommend reading a book of a guy called Todd Henry. He wrote a book called Creativity on Demand, and he has a whole chapter on how to structure and how to make a notation process. Because most of the times when we have an idea, we think it's cool, it's not relevant at the moment, we never even write it down. But as you mentioned, 5 years later, it could be something that would help you and solve your current situation. So notation is a very important process in this. And he has like a great explanation. He has these diaries that you can use for your work, whether it's online or in paper. So I highly recommend that for everyone. And answering your question, I mean, are your ideas like technical products? So from what I understood, they're not like visual ideas. They're more something like
technical products.
Yeah.
And which requires technical implementation and somehow complex things in general. But not only the structure, but the attitude towards the ideas. I mean, hey, one idea, but not possible to implement this. It's something to do, and then dismiss it. I mean, solving this problem, actually.
Yeah, I will be afraid to give you an advice here because I barely work with physical objects. So all of the projects that I work with are video related or content related or art related. So I will be probably afraid to interfere in your process. But from what I can say from your question, that it's important to break down the complex situation into easy steps and then solve it step by step, right? So don't look at the idea as a one big whole thing, but rather look at it as a separate elements, and this could lead you somewhere further. So this is what I can tell you for now, but I can think about it further and try to come up with some other examples, but I don't want to mislead you right now.
No problem. Thank you.
Well, I've been just a bit amused about this brain machine you showed us. Do you consider that a placebo, or do you consider that kind of reality? Well, the placebo would be also the effect of all this stuff. What's your opinion to that?
Thank you for your question.
Sorry, I just didn't want to keep it as serious here.
Well, I think that in creativity, placebo is kind of a reality, right? So I think that I cannot really understand how can it work from the scientific point of view. How can you stimulate the neurons that are responsible for creativity? Although I watched hundreds of their videos and of their talks. So for me, it looks like more of a boosting effect rather than the one that's actually bringing results. So I think it's a cool experiment that can help people think that they're more creative in here or in here. So that's my personal.
You think?
Yeah, my personal opinion is that.
Anyone else?
Hi. So I have a problem that I have too much ideas, and I think so I'm creative too much, and we do a lot of things in the same time, so that the project don't go really in the right way, what I think, because we open here one models and here one models, and no models from all of them are 100% finished. Do you think this is the bad way, or this is a good way to have a lot of places to work in the same time? So when you are you don't like to work in this model, you can work in the other one, like what we do now, or we have to focus on one thing and we finish it and go to the other thing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So there is a rule of 3. So one creative cannot work more than on 3 tasks at the same time. So you need to choose your big 3 very carefully. So if it's on your mind, it's on your mind. You cannot get rid of it. And this big 3 also includes your personal projects. You know what I mean? Because if you're working on something in your personal life, I don't know, you're creating some app, and then at work you have 10 other great projects, you do not get rid of your personal project at your work hours. So that's why it's important to always choose 3. This is one thing that I can tell you. Another thing is that it's always good to be full of half ideas or little ideas that can lead you somewhere else. But it's just important to generate them, to note them down, and then to select those which you think should be finalized and those where the team effort should go into. Because otherwise, as you say, there will be always a lot of things that just started, but nothing that have actually grown. So I would probably suggest to go in the direction of choosing 1 or 2, or as I said, maximum 3, and letting them grow and then see what it does, and then picking up the others. And I think it's more of a leadership problem than someone's personal problem, because a creative leader is there to help you choose and help you boost your energy only into those selected projects.
More questions? Doesn't seem like it. I think you will be around quite some time tonight, so
yes.
Maybe one or two can just approach you after this.
Yeah. Thank you very much.